sign up, and both bands and soloists are welcome. Please return your entry agreement and media release from the packet to the main office by tomorrow, Wednesday, March 2nd.
Students interested in being an SBO next year, please come to the informational meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, March 2nd at 3:30 in the Tech Atrium.
Seniors, there are some special scholarships only available to local students and some only available to Harriman High seniors. Come to the scholarship workshop on Friday at 1 in the counseling center to learn more.
If you are a senior and are interested in applying for graduation corps, they are available at the counseling center and on our website. Applications must be completed and turned in by March 31st. If you have any questions, please see your counselor or Stephanie Dudson in the counseling center.
Girls basketball is taking on Riverton tonight for the state playoffs at the Huntsman Center starting at 9:10. Come support our amazing Mustangs.
We're wishing good luck to anybody who's trying out for a team sport and know that our spring sports are looking for team managers.
And now for the pledge. Please stand and repeat the pledge after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and remember, it's always a great day to be a Mustang.
Okay. So I'm going to put up here on the projector a few questions that I think are central to understanding streetcar and desire. Hopefully. There we go. We've got 5 different questions that I think are really important to understanding this book. So in your little groups that you talk in or in your pairs, you're going to choose 2 of these that you think are most interesting for this book and talk about what you think the book thinks about these ideas. Okay, we'll talk together. Okay. So I want to talk about a couple major differences between the book and the play, or between the book version of the play and the movie version of the play. So the first major difference that I want to look at is when Blanche is talking about her husband who died. So go to page 114 for that. Scene 6, right at the very end. Okay, so the movie talks about this in very coded ways. By coded, I mean it's like veiled, you know? Yeah, that's not as explicit as it is in the book. So Blanche says he was a boy, just a boy when I was a very young girl. When I was 16, I made the discovery, love, all at once and much too completely. It was like you suddenly turned a blinding light on something that had always been half in shadow. That's how it struck the world for me, but I was unlucky, deluded. There was something different about the boy, a nervousness, a softness and tenderness which wasn't like a man's. So the movie version says there's something different about him and that he's soft and tender, but it does not say which wasn't like a man's. Although he wasn't the least bit effeminate looking, still that thing was there. He came to me for help. I didn't know that. I didn't find out anything till after our marriage when we'd run away and come back. And all I knew was I'd failed him in some mysterious way and wasn't able to give the help he needed, but couldn't speak of. He was in the quicksands and clutching at me, but I wasn't holding him out. I was slipping in with him. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything except I loved him unendurably, but without being able to help him or help myself. Then I found out in the worst of all possible ways by coming suddenly into a room that I thought was empty, which wasn't empty, but had two people in it. The boy I had married and an older man who had been his friend for years. So the movie does not say all of that. The play, just to be clear, like what is, wrong with her first husband? Yeah.
He's gay.
He's gay. Yeah, exactly. So she's talking about it like almost with like a sense of embarrassment, it feels like she also doesn't want to say that, like the movie, she doesn't want to say that up front. She doesn't want to say like he wasn't attracted to me, he was attracted to men, or to say anything about like, how sort of upsetting it would be to her to find him in, cheating on her, right? Instead, she kind of like keeps this sort of like romanticized performance that she has. And she just talks about how he was soft, how he was effeminate, how he was, or not effeminate, actually, how he was soft and tender and a little bit nervous. And in the play, it's very clear that her husband was gay. In the movie, they try to make it clear without making it clear. And part of that was because of the Hays Code. Did I tell you guys about the Hays Code?
No, but I know.
But you know about it. So in the 20s and 30s, movies started to become a little bit more scandalous as they went along. So you can watch movies from the 30s. They're not rated because there wasn't a rating system. You can watch movies from the 30s with nudity in them, and which is really funny when we can show movies in class that are not rated. That's just fine, and they're old, and so parents are just like, oh, they're old, it's fine, So Lord of the Flies is one of those. It's old, it's before rating, so I'm sure it's completely free of any sort of objectionable content, right? Because there's this like impression that we've just gotten more and more like, I don't know, crazy in terms of media. Not the case. Lord of the Flies has like a whole bunch of naked little boys running around for the whole thing. So in the 30s, the sort of censorship board says we need to do something about these movies. They're starting to like, degrade people's morality or something like that. So they had this thing, instead of imposing censorship, well, instead of imposing a rating system on the films, they decided that all movies just need to meet the minimum requirements developed by this guy named Hayes. So they called this the Hayes Code, and certain things you couldn't show in movies. Like, for example, if you've ever wondered why Lucy and Ricky and I Love Lucy don't share a queen bed, it was because queen beds were prohibited from being shown according to the Hayes Code. And actually it was kind of scandalous to show anybody ever in bed at all. Like, even if they're just like waking up from sleeping, like, you know, you had to be really careful with how you did that. You know, that scene in the movie after Stanley yells Stella, and we see Stella on like a rumpled bed the next morning, that like was really pushing the rules of the Hayes Code. That probably would have gotten some eyes on it. Another thing you can't talk about under the Hayes Code is anything LGBTQ at all. So there were all sorts of ways then that those ideas became coded, ways that, oh, great, that light has been giving me trouble all year, ways that have sort of become part of the culture now, which is really interesting. Like the ways that that community was censored in movies has become like something that was embraced, but you could kind of like tell little things, you know, like if a woman is wearing a suit instead of a skirt, okay, we know she's the gay one, you know, or in this case, if the man is described as soft, we know that that's code for gay in these early movies. So the movie is still saying it. The movie is still like being clear about it in its own way, but only if you were sort of clued into what those codes were. But in the play, it's more explicit. And here's what we see happening afterwards. It says, afterwards, we pretended that nothing had been discovered. Yes, the three of us drove out to Moonlight Casino, very drunk and laughing all the way. We danced the Varsuviana. Suddenly, in the middle of the dance, the boy I had married broke away from me and ran out of the casino. A few moments later, a shot. It just feels random at that moment. I ran out. All did. All ran and gathered about the terrible thing at the edge of the lake. I couldn't get near for the crowding. Then somebody caught my arm. Don't go any closer. Come back. You don't want to see. See? See what? Then I heard voices say, Alan, Alan, the gray boy. He'd stuck the revolver into his mouth and fired so that the back of his head had been blown away. The movie is not that explicit with the gore either. It was because on the dance floor, unable to stop myself, I'd suddenly said, I saw, I know, you disgust me. And then the searchlight, which had been turned on the world, was turned off again. And never for one moment since has there been any light that's stronger than this kitchen candle. All right, so in the book, because this is more clear what she did, I think we get a clearer picture of where her trauma is kind of not just, I don't think that the trauma of her past only exists at this moment, but I think that a lot of what she does later in her story, you know, later in her life can be taken back to this moment. So what do you think happens to Blanche in this little section? I mean, kind of psychologically. This play asks us to psychoanalyze her a little bit. Grace? Like past judgment, maybe. Yeah, so she says this really nasty thing to him, something that had stayed coded in their lives, to use that word again, like something they had been ignoring for a long time. She brings it to the surface and says it out loud explicitly. Here's the reality of our situation. You disgust me, and this is what causes him to kill himself. So yeah, I think there's a ton of guilt wrapped up in everything that she does now, especially in relationship to men and to her own desire. What else could be sort of going on with Blanche based on this little scene? Think about that question about fantasy and the kind of the way that fantasy can play a role in your life. Where do you think, because Blanche is performative, right? She's annoying to me, at least. I don't know. Did you find her annoying? She's sympathetic, obviously. I empathize with her, but also you kind of just want her to shut up sometimes. She has these long monologues and this fake little voice, and you're like, stop talking. And I think she calls it that magic. She says, oh, I always try and present magic for everyone. How could that have a root in this moment for her? Sammy?
Her first husband, the one that like she idolized, wasn't attracted to her, so she kind of set attraction with these like random men at the
Many strangers, right? Yeah, I think she's always looking for somebody who is attracted to her. And I think that in her marriage, she seemed to have to deny her own desire a lot, like, or not deny it, but sort of like suppress it. And so now that she's older and she sees, and there's men all around her, she's not suppressing it in the same way anymore. She's acting out in that way, right?
I think that for lots of the plays, she tried to keep this different life and image up in front of Stella and Stanley and everybody else. And so when she then told all of this to Mitch, it was kind of like this break of character for her. And so now she finally has to deal with the real life rather than the fantasy world she created, and she started to believe that she.
Yeah, like the fantasy is becoming the reality and she can't distinguish between the two as much. It's kind of an echo then of what happened with Alan, her first husband. Well, I guess her only husband, her ex-husband. Yes. Her dead husband, yes. It is that when she speaks out, when she says what is true to her, and like, I'm not saying that what is true to her is like respectable or a good thing to be true to her, but when she speaks out and says something that is true to her, that really bad things happen from that. So she doesn't want to break that fantasy again.
Well, adding up on what Remy said, it also says that she.
Teachers, sorry for the interruption. Those students who are participating in the state math competition, if we could get you to come to the tech atrium, thanks.
Sure, that's what she is.
Never for one moment since has there been any light that's stronger than this candle.
Yeah.
She kind of feels like she has the spotlight on her, because even though what happened in her past was traumatic, she is kind of there and really exposed.
Yeah.
To Mitch, who she's having an intimate moment. So she's kind of naked.
Yeah, that vulnerability as it's represented in light, like that she's kind of like all of her sort of past is laid bare, that kind of nakedness is really scary for her. And you see the way that she tries to dress that up all the time to avoid that kind of sort of, you said the spotlight on her, right? So she has, the furs and the pearls and the tiara and all of it is fake, but all of it is a way of like performing a certain way so that somebody can't see that nakedness. Yes, Emmy.
It's also notable to mention how when she got married, she was 16.
Really young, yeah.
Um,
Or at least that's when she met him.
yeah, but still, that is like incredibly young.
You don't want to get married right now?
I just turned
This year?
17.
Oh, you're past, you're an old maid
I know.
now. Yeah, so as a really young person, those are the years that are really defining how your relationships are going to go to. These very first relationships that you experience are kind of telling you what to look for and what not to look for. So it's important that she was young. It's also important because Blanche's worst quality is going after young boys. It's almost like she is stuck in that moment, like she keeps looking for that affirmation from a boy the same age that Alan was. Yeah.
It also seems like she kind of still mentally has this like immaturity. Like she reminds me like a lot of my grandmother, who is like my grandmother's like in her 70s, but tries to act and pretend like she's maybe in her 50s.
Oh, okay.
Like she just got a wig and stuff tied her bald. She's from LA. It shows. But like it's very much a like fear of aging, kind of almost trauma response, maybe.
Yes. Fear of aging is so interesting for a woman like Blanche because in some ways it's about her looks. And we always hear her talking about her looks. Like, oh, I don't want the light on me because you might see, we assume like wrinkles and like age spots and whatever. Blanche is like in her early 40s, it seems like, maybe late 30s. Does it ever say?
I'm pretty sure, I think I saw stuff like she was in her 30s.
I think so. I think it does say.
Maybe even early 30s.
Oh no. I hate that. I hate. Yeah.
And Stella's
Stella's young. Yeah. Okay. So she's younger than me. Oh, great. All right. So, but she's afraid of the light for demonstrating that age, right? So part of that is looks, because as women get older, we don't like, them to have the wrinkles. We don't like them to look old, the gray hairs and whatever. But I think part of that is also because of the association of age and innocence. That when you are young and when you are 16 and you are in this relationship with another young person, it's like you're fresh, you're sort of like new to the world and you're innocent. But part of what is so disturbing about Blanche and aging is that the more you age, the more likely it is you are to have experiences, as she says, with many men. So there's also this association of age to kind of like living a life and not being so innocent anymore, and maybe being tarnished in some way. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Okay. Other major difference I want to look at is just at the very end, last 2 pages, 178, 179 in our copies before the question and answer thing. All right, we talked about it in the movie. And we looked at how she kind of like returns up the stairs, but there are some major differences between how the movie presents the ending and how the book does. So Stella's yelling after Blanche, Blanche, Blanche. Blanche walks on without turning, followed by the doctor and the matron. They go around the corner of the building. Eunice descends to Stella and places the child in her arms. That is different in the movie. I know it's been a few days since we watched the movie. In the movie, Stella walks up to the bassinet, picks up the child and cradles it. In the play, Eunice hands Stella the baby. It is wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Stella, so we know it's a boy. Stella accepts the child sobbingly. Eunice continues downstairs and enters the kitchen where the men, except for Stanley, are returning silently to their places about the table. Stanley has gone out on the porch and stands at the foot of the steps looking at Stella, a bit uncertainly. Stella? She sobs with inhuman abandon. There is something luxurious in her complete surrender to crying now that her sister is gone. Stanley says voluptuously and soothingly, now honey, now love, now love. He kneels beside her and his fingers find the opening of her blouse. Now love, now love. The luxurious sobbing, the sensual murmur fade away under the swelling music of the blue piano and the muted trumpet. And then from inside you hear Steve, I don't know which one Steve is. Oh, it's Eunice's husband, say, this game is 7-card stud. Okay, really different than the play. The play has her picking up the baby. She runs upstairs. She says, never again. I'm never going back to him again. And she runs upstairs. And then we hear Stanley repeat his famous Stella. But they don't have this moment where he's, comforting her, or maybe it's not comfort. Tell me about the tones and the different endings. Yeah.
In the play, Stanley's starting to take advantage of her again, and it's like kind of put his fingers into like her shirt.
Yes.
He wants
Yes. So it is associated. What a lovely way to put that. On the recording, good. It is associated with desire. Right? In the play, I don't think you get that sense. Kind of you do. It's a little bit veiled. Like we remember what happened last time Stanley yells Stella. Stella comes downstairs and she's like coming down the stairs, and then they hug and he picks her up and we know what happens. In the play, it's like he's right there. They're right there together. So doesn't end on this moment where Stella can either accept him or doesn't. It does feel like Stella accepts him in that moment. Anything else about the word choices here or the way that they're
I
interacting?
think it's super interesting that like Eunice has to be able to hand her the baby. Because like in the other one it's like, oh yeah, she went to her baby first, like she went to her baby for comfort. But in the other one it's like Eunice is like, you need some help.
Yeah,
And
good.
it's like she like kind of almost begrudgingly accepts the help and is like, hey, fine, whatever, like you're handing me a baby, like I'll hold it, I guess.
Yeah. Why is that interesting for her character?
I don't know. I think like it shows like her reliance on like wanting, like desiring something. Like she desires Stanley, but this baby, like she just had, and she's just like,
That's the result of the desire for
yeah,
Stanley.
she's like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if it's just part of my lifetime, because like you kind of get the vibe that like she didn't really want to be a mother. She just wanted to kind of be the young married couple forever.
Yeah, I don't think that Stella has a big maternal vibe to her in the play, right? And so like the maternal kind of nurturing quality is sort of like foisted onto her, like, hey, this is the reason that you are in this couple. You know, rather than like, this is the result of me being in a couple, this is the reason that you were in a couple. So like comfort the baby. This can be maybe a reason to stay too. Christiane, what were you saying?
Like in the movie, she is able to run, and might come back, she might not, we don't know. But in this, it feels like the after launch is like basically forcibly taken from her. She just feels too broken to run,
Yeah.
and she doesn't see a way out.
Yeah, so she is physically stuck in this spot, and she has Stanley touching her to keep her physically stuck in that spot too. So there's a more sense of like somebody anchoring you. You've got the baby and Stanley, so it's like, oh, she's going to be staying here. Ethan?
The instrumental choice that they end on is like really interesting. It says at the end of the blue piano.
Yeah.
It almost feels like Stella's lost and Stanley's won. Like this is the note that we got. Very sad.
If it's a battle between the sexes, the man has clearly won. And so you've got this sort of like the blue piano. It's
Yeah,
like
It
this
sounds like
melancholy. What if it ended like that? Wah, wah, wah. But yeah, okay, so it ends with this kind of like tragic sound to it. Audrey?
Also, like the baby could represent like a permanence of her being stuck in the situation, because babies are very permanent.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's like she can't just walk away from a baby now.
Yeah.
Like she's kind of stuck there because of the baby also. Like she can't just leave Stanley, because she'd probably also be leaving her child. And if she brings her child with her, that's also a bit of Stanley that she's bringing with her.
Yeah,
So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
okay, so
Yeah.
because it's a boy too. Yeah, I could totally see that like you are always going to have Stanley. The baby daddy is always going to be in your life. Also, legality at this time didn't always favor the mother in custody. Like these days usually favors the mother in custody, unless like the mother seems unfit to be a mother. In the 40s and 50s, that was just, it was starting to change, but often it would be a father who gained custody too. So yeah. Akela?
One thing interesting with the blue piano, like when you're reading the book, like that is always something that's like in the background, like in the awkward silences, especially where Stanley is there. Like it just seems to always be like perpetually playing. And so like the fact that they end with that is super interesting.
Yeah, that muted trumpet sound too. I should have pulled up some. That, like that was a pretty good muted trumpet. There is also something here, it says sensual murmur, luxurious sobbing. There is something about that muted trumpet that is also associated with sensuality quite often, and just jazz music in general. I'm sure you've heard of all the people in the 20s that were terrified of jazz. It's funny now because jazz is associated with like middle-aged white men. But in the 20s, jazz was like, oh, it's going to be, intermingling of races. People are going to be dancing. There's no like clear beat. It's just going to be chaos. And like, I feel like it's like kind of like what we think of now as being like the danger of, the sweaty dark nightclub is jazz music. So to have that here at the end, it's like the tragedy, but it's a tragedy mixed with the sensuality of it. There's also luxurious happens twice. It says that she has luxurious sobbing. There's something luxurious in her complete surrender to crying now. What do you think about that word? Does it ever feel luxurious for you to cry? It's a strange word. It's kind of like that letting go can be nice. Like sometimes it's like we talk about sobbing or we talk about crying as being like a release. like, it's all this pent up sadness. I need just to have a good cry and then I'm gonna be okay. I think in this instance, this letting go of her problems, that like Blanche is leaving and now she can have this luxurious cry, is something comforting.
Well, I was also thinking, because if you think about her situation, the only thing she can really do is because in her past, she may have been able to live with Blanche, but now that Blanche is gone, she has no other outlets.
Interesting. She really is like completely alone in this space, even as she's surrounded by people. Yeah. Michaela.
Another thing I think is interesting is as soon as like she can't really see Blanche anymore, Blanche can't see her. So it kind of is also like a nod to like the fact that Blanche had up this act, and so almost like she felt like she couldn't break down in front of Blanche because Blanche would always be so like she would break down, but it would be like a performance of breakdown. Like you could tell it wasn't really like there. So she felt like she had to like have this perfect composure around her and almost put up an act for her. So it was only once that was gone that she felt like she could actually break down.
Yeah, and Stanley sees that too, where Stanley is always like, well, when your sister goes away, it's going to be like it was before. Like everything just feels false while your sister is here, and everybody has to be sort of like putting on a performance of civility. But once your sister's gone, we can act out on our emotions. We can act out on our crying and our breakdowns and our fights and our sex and all of that, right? So they're like right here at the very end, I think, recalls earlier in the play where Blanche is like, he is a brute. He's an animal. You have to get out of this situation. Stanley has just punched her and she's pregnant. And we see her like in the movie, I think there was a good representation of it. It's not just like a whack. It's like he is like railing on this woman, right? And she immediately goes back to him. And Blanche is like, what are you doing? This is crazy of you to do this. I mean, speaking of people who are crazy, it's not just Blanche, right? So this is crazy of you to do this. You can't go back to him. You need to get out of this. And Stella says, who says I'm in something I want to get out of? And I think that's really important for understanding this play. Yes, in some ways we can see Stella as being stuck in the situation. What is she going to do? She might lose her child. And even if she doesn't lose her child, there's like a little mini Stanley and she has to deal with that now, right? In a lot of ways, we can see this as this kind of like woman is stuck in a domestic relationship or a domestic abuse relationship. But in other ways, at the very end here, with the luxurious crying and the realization that Stella is not in something she wants to get out of, and the fact that people tell her, you just have to believe Stanley. You can't believe your sister. You need to believe Stanley about what happened to them. We can ask ourselves, how complicit is Stella in the events that happen in the play? And maybe we don't want to talk about complicity, but how much does her desire, not just her fear or her sort of sense of being stuck, but how much does her desire also keep her in that situation? Which is something the movie touches on, but maybe is not as explicit as this ending. Yeah.
We in our group, we kind of focused on like how he really only like hits her once, and yes, it's a big deal, but the more like it's more of an emotional abuse, and like even though she can see that, he uses it, the emotional abuse, in a way like he plays off of her desires and uses that to like emotionally abuse her. That's the bigger issue rather than the fact that he got drunk and punched her, I think, in this novel, because he only really like acts out on his urges like once in the whole entire play, when really the whole entire thing is him emotionally abusing.
Yeah, and the kind of pent up danger of what he could present too, because he does like throw his food, he like picks it up and he's like, that's me clearing my plate or whatever. Like he's always sort of like displaying that physical presence, but in a way that Stanley knows how good looking he is, I think. And that, I think you're right, that's a tool he uses to emotionally abuse her. Okay, dark play, really dark play. So instead of me teaching this play, we are going to have you guys teach the play to each other. I'm going to give you the assignment. So you're going to each be assigned to and I will get your annotations while we're doing this. You're going to each be assigned to a couple scenes in the play. We'll be in small groups and then have you do it randomly. You're gonna each be assigned to certain scenes, and you're gonna be responsible for teaching us your scenes. So the teaching has to include 3 things, and it can be in any order. Just try and see what makes sense for the best teaching. So 1, you got to have some kind of analysis assignment, and that could be a discussion of a certain portion of the book. It can be like annotating and underlining. You can be doing, I don't know what MWDS elements is, so that came from another teacher. But you can have it be any kind of analysis activity that we've done in here, or be creative with how you can get people to actually analyze well. You need some sort of writing exercise. I would say you don't want your writing exercise to take more than 15 minutes because everybody will be mad at you, but you need something where you're trying to get your fellow students to practice their writing a little bit. And then you need some kind of activity, and the activity can be like, it can be whatever you want it to be. Like I would count like our newlywed game as a kind of activity, or when we were looking at the river passage from As I Lay Dying and we were listening to music, that could be a kind of activity. It could be film clips, it could be clips from Streetcar, it could be related obviously, but other film clips to get people thinking about the themes. Be as creative as you can be with the activity, because that's how you can get people's interest. So again, you can do any order. Maybe you start with the activity to hook people in, and then you have them write to get them thinking, and then you have the discussion. Maybe you have the discussion and then get them to write because they're all prepared for the writing. You're going to think about how those things fit together. You get 30 to 45 minutes. I know that sounds like a lot right now, but as you are planning, you're going to realize it's not so much. Usually I end up having to kind of cut people off with this thing because I don't know, you're very good at leading discussions is partly why. And if you are, is anybody else beside Christiane going to be gone next time? Okay, so if you are gone,
I think I am going to.
oh my gosh.
I'm going to.
Awesome. We're going to California.
You guys are
Which
going
is
to
so awesome.
Long
Because
Beach.
guess what, Christiane? I got diagnosed with the flu yesterday. I'm screaming on the inside. Do you know
Wait,
how
next
many
time's
drugs
Friday,
are in my
right?
system right
I'll
now?
be here on Friday.
So many.
Next time
It's
is
Thursday.
Thursday.
No, it's not good.
Thursday is the year.
I literally was like,
Monday.
give me whatever
Oh, I
you
will
can
be
to kill it.
I just,
Take
I
it
don't
out.
feel like
And
sleep.
he's like, I can give you one
Monday
thing that
after
will
school,
reduce your
Tuesday
flu by
and
one
Wednesday.
day. And I'm like,
Wednesday
I'll
we
take
go to
it.
School, and then we
So then I
sleep
went
in.
home and I
So
slept
it's
for
like really
14
confusing.
hours.
Okay, okay. So if it,
I should be here at home every day.
okay, good. So if you're going to be gone on next time, I am going to have you not sign up for scenes 1 and 2. So that's. Audrey, I'll have you do. Okay, everybody else, random. Sorry, I don't have a bigger cup.
That ruined it.
Oh, I got it.
Why, you don't like those scenes you got?
I just have some ideas.
Hang on, who's not here? Kale and, okay, that's fine. All right. Who got scenes 1 and 2? Okay, that's funny. Who got scenes 3 through 6? All right, great. And then who's 7 to end? Yay. Okay, great. So I'm going to wait, raise your hand if you're 7 to end again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to put Kale in your group, 7 to end, and scenes 3 and 6. Raise your hand again. I'm going to put Kale in your group. So they both couldn't be here today. You guys give them some task to do. So I will have you, I'll give you their email address and you give them something that they are supposed to do. Like, oh, you have to lead the discussion on this quote. So prepare for that. Or in terms of the activity, this is what you are in charge of doing. Give them some task to do. Don't give them like, don't just pawn off like you just do the whole discussion or something, try and make it even, but they will be prepared. I've warned them about this. Okay, so go and sit with your group. Scenes 1 and 2 over here, scenes 3 and 6 over here, scenes 7. Oh yeah, okay, never mind. Scenes 1 and 2 over here, scenes 3 through 6 over here, and 7 to end over here. Wow. Okay, you have the rest of class to prepare for this. Let me give you a couple hints. As a teacher, a new teacher, it is a really good idea to over prepare. By that, I don't mean like preparing more material than you know and you have time for, but by that, I mean planning how the discussion is going to go. Like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I get up here and I've read this book enough that I'm like, I don't know, we'll just talk about it for a while. That's, to be frank, that's what I did today. So I'm just like, all right, we'll just talk about these 2 scenes and I'll see where it goes. Sometimes again, it works and doesn't. But as new teachers who are new to this book, you really want to kind of plan the way the discussion is going to go. So if any part of your lesson, and it probably should, includes discussion involving the class, kind of plan lots of different questions that you might not get to all of them, and kind of plan the responses that you're sort of expecting to get so that you know how to sort of shape this discussion. Otherwise it ends up being like, and what was her boyfriend's name? Mitch. Good. And what was on the lantern? Like it's what does the symbol of the lantern mean? Wow. Okay. And it's just like boring. So over plan and you'll be safe and you'll do so well, but everybody's going to do well anyway. Okay, your goal is to help people understand this play.